So I've been wanting to do a diary for a bit. I could never find anything that inspired me to do it. It's not really a diary, just a quick reaction to something, but it's interesting. So this over here is, what's his name? Jack? I think Jack Morgan. And I discovered his content a long time ago when he was much smaller. He's now fairly big. He's like 250,000 subs or something. And he's doing fairly well, I think, for himself. But in this particular video, he says that he's unhappy with something that happened to him in his life, and he's trying to sort of explain it. And there's various bits it touches on. I want to touch on at least two. So let's listen to this bit in particular, and then I'll say my piece.
Yeah, dude, I'm going through it today. I just figured I'd come on here and let you know, the one day I really needed a parent to talk to, they're dead. Assholes. I'm just kidding. I miss them. But, I'll be fine. I'll be alright. I still have to show up to work, though, I don't have a job that I could just like show up to and half-ass it, just kind of hide, So, still gonna show up to work, and I made a promise that I would, when I'm having these days, I'll talk about it.
That's interesting enough, I suppose. So, a few things. Number one, the last sentence he said. So he's much younger than me. He's about 7 years younger than me, I think. I can relate to very much. My father is now completely incompetent. It is impossible to have a conversation with him. His brain doesn't work. And my mother has passed. Now, I had what could be argued a very, very ugly relationship with my parents, generally speaking. There are many reasons for this, etc. I'm not going to go into them now. But I haven't lived with them in any meaningful way for the past 25 years is probably accurate. So when I recently tried to get them to come closer to my place just because they were ill and poorly, and I succeeded, which was quite the feat. They didn't resist much, and I had found them to be the same as before or worse than when I'd left. So I'd left as a kind of teenager or late teenager, say early 20s, that sort of thing, and I found them again at the age of 40. So, but what he said is true. I don't have parents I can ask anything from in terms of advice or anything like this. In fact, I haven't had this particular figure in my life for the past 20 years plus. Now, what is different is that as time passes, now that I am 40, I realize that not having that is a big loss on my part. And I'm realizing another thing, because now I'm a father of several, that I don't have a sibling. So I have never been able to relate to somebody in that way either. Now, there's many families that are unhealthy for this perspective. You could argue that mine was one of these. But still, this to me feels like a massive loss, like a gaping hole in my life that will never be filled, and there's no option for it to ever be filled. So my wife effectively acts as my parental advice as well as my sibling liaison, if you will. And I think it's kind of mutual because she's an only child as well. Her parents are a little bit more functional than mine, but it's not like she has a great relationship with them. And her relationship looks much more healthy from the outside, but it's actually quite rotten on the inside, whereas mine looked awful from the outside because it was awful from the inside too. So, Anyway, but point number one, age 40 or thereabouts. He says 36, I think he says, or 37, I don't know. Late 30s, whatever, mid 30s. You start realizing things like these. And because we're already children of the generation that followed the boomers, whatever we're called, millennials, I think, we're all late. So our parents died early in our lives, in our lifespan. That's just how it works. And so we experience this type of loss well early. And Jack over here, I don't think he has any children of his own. And I think he's talking about potentially having some. But he talks in the typical way that people my age, in my age bracket, talk. Oh yeah, I'll have a child, etc. And then they wait and wait and wait and wait. And it's either this or that or whatever. And then eventually either it happens stupidly late or it doesn't happen at all. But that's a different conversation altogether. Now, another thing he talked about in this particular video is he was essentially realizing how quite a lot of the things that he did in his life are affecting the situation now. So that's the kind of wisdom that you can only get the moment in which you start aging more meaningfully. Like, I would argue the moment you pass what Dante would have referred to as the halfway through life, meaning 35. You pass that age and you start looking backwards. I've done this analogy before, but if you can imagine your life being a span, or sort of like this, right? And this is the beginning and this is the end, right? At the beginning, you can only look that way. You can only look forward, right? And as you progress, you start having a perspective that's forward and you realize that's more myopic than you thought. And then that way you can start seeing more clearly. All the way until you get till the end where your only perspective is that way. So you only live from memories and that sort of thing. So that's the recap of that. But one thing that Jack was saying is that he's now finding issues with people essentially. I mean, I have to deduce some things because he was extremely vague and very ineloquent in explaining this, and he would agree to it, as he himself said. So anyway, he's experiencing probably people who are envious of him because he's now successful, even though he had to grind for a very long time to get to the place he is. And he talks about his past and things he would have preferred to do than what he does right now, which is talk for a living and that sort of thing. And yeah, I can relate to this very much. I've made a bunch of decisions in my life, and ironically, unaware in a sense, I made most of my very good decisions very young. So different from what he's saying, right? He's saying he made lots of decisions early on that didn't really pay off, and now he's made certain other decisions that are paying off a little bit better, and it's all part of the walk of life. What's cool about what he's saying is that he is arguing that this is all his decision. He uses the terminology, this is my fault. All of the good things are my fault, or the bad things are my fault. And that's a very, very important realization. It's very good that people like Jack are sharing this on the internet, in my opinion, because it has now been decades, certainly in my life, that what I see is people who have success or failures always, always is strong, but frequently, for one reason or another, attribute their fortune or misfortune to external circumstances or actors. I was once at a car show. This was still in Canada, and there was this chap with a gorgeous Lamborghini Diablo, black it was. And I think he had modified it and added a turbo to it or something like that. It must have been ludicrously quick, that thing. But it looked the part, you know. And this was this sort of older gentleman, probably 10 years my senior, that sort of thing. So no, probably 20 years my senior. I was 30 at the time, so he would have probably been 50. Something like that. Maybe even 60, right? And so, you know, memories are difficult to wade through. And we started talking, And he was telling me that he, in his life, was somebody who ran a company that dealt with air conditioning systems. And so he ran this company. So he owned it or something. And he said, of course, I'm very fortunate that I own this car. And I, hubris of youth, really, started lecturing the guy. Unbelievable. But I did do it. And to my surprise now in hindsight, he didn't just dismiss me. He actually listened. And he agreed, I think, by the end. But basically what I told him is, I don't understand why him, like everybody else who has made it in life, feels this peculiar need to apologize to others for their success. I don't understand it at all. Right? He did the long hours. He employs hundreds of families with his company that he built up. Of course, he's reaping some rewards from it, but it's not like it came without pain and suffering. I mean, I am a very, very, very bad entrepreneur myself. In fact, so bad, I don't dare hire anybody for numerous reasons. So I'm not even at that stage yet, despite me essentially having been an entrepreneur for about 10 years now, very unsuccessfully. I'll get to that later. And so I essentially started like kind of counterattacking that. I was like, that doesn't make any sense, man. You got here because of your merit. You bought this car because you wanted this car. You even repair it yourself. You work on it yourself. And this is amazing. You should be absolutely proud of what you did and where you are. And everybody in this show is happier because you bought this car and you brought it along so we can see it. Like, what chance does almost anybody in this entire town to ever see a Lamborghini Diablo? I think it was one of those four-wheel drive ones. I really don't know much about supercars and hypercars. They really don't do much for me. But it was still cool, you know. And it was just beside an R8, if I remember right. Don't know if a V10 or a V8, doesn't matter. But it was super cool. And like he so took my point and he thanked me and he said that it was impressive that somebody my age at the time, which would have been 30, would talk the way that I did. I just found it deeply unjust that this man should apologize to others for delighting them. It doesn't make any sense at all to me. So that's one aspect. Then, of course, you have the other aspect, the much more common one, which is that people for whom things didn't work out will tend to blame A, B, Z, whatever. Right? So, for example, I have made lots of bad business decisions in my life as an entrepreneur. I hired the wrong person once, and that was painful. It cost me a lot. I hired, even in personal life, hired the wrong man to do repairs on some of my cars, which cost me a huge amount of anguish. Twice in my life, in fact. This is, again, my fault. Right? I don't blame anybody else for this. I blame myself. I mean, blame myself within reason, right? But the point is, this type of reasoning leads me to not having any regrets or any strange type of resentment towards others, which I think is what Jack is experiencing from these other people whom he would have called close otherwise. Or at least this is my deduction or interpretation of what it is that he's saying. But he is correctly, like I said, clumsily but correctly putting forward the point that his decisions led him to where he is. And of course there's been luck, and of course there's been opportunity, and of course some other people have had less of it, etc., etc., etc. But you can see, for example, the way I'm discussing this, I'm much less successful than he is. I'm probably going to be much less successful than he will than I will forever be much less successful than he is now or will be in future. But no part of me has any envy, because envy is a nonsensical thing to feel. It's a nonsensical sentiment. Ambition, sure. Admiration, fine. But envy doesn't make any sense. Because envy essentially will lead you to want to tear him down. But that doesn't make any sense. His success is not your failure. That's not how it works. So, I've spoken about not being able to get in touch with parents and having that type of contact. I've spoken about owning one's own destiny. I don't recall if there's anything else I wanted to touch on. Yeah, probably not. So I think it's good if I stop it here. But yeah, I think in the end of the day, this is sort of more of a diary than a reaction. So I think I'm going to use it this way. So I hope that Jack here gets through his issues, whatever they are. I'm sure he will, as he himself said. We'll get through it and carry on. But it's cool to see an individual graduate to an adult level of wisdom. Wisdom is an interesting concept because while it may depend on intelligence to some extent and on experience to some extent, it is a very strange concept. It's kind of the intelligence of time. As you age, you gain it. You should gain it. I'm not sure that everybody does, and it's really valuable. And youth absolutely don't see the value of it, at least initially. That's very silly. That's possibly something else I could briefly talk about as well. At least in my generation, I have the distinct impression that all of us have absolutely no reverence for seniority, for older age, and there's some reason for that. I don't think we've been given a very good example from our parents and grandparents. Grandparents perhaps better than parents, but I suspect that's more rose-tinted glasses than very much else. The older you become, the more mentally stable you should become, the more reasoning and the more the wiser, really, you should become. It is very odd to observe older people that seem a bit shallow or nonsensical. So, for example, to me, observing modern people, say women or men that say inject Botox or use Ozempic or transplant their hair or that sort of stuff, it's borderline monstrous. I not only does it look absolutely woeful, but it is kind of incomprehensible to me, because it's fighting off who you are by pretending to be a younger version of yourself, and it really doesn't work. You're almost certainly going to be bitter about the failings of your body as it ages and grows less sprightly, than accepting the natural course of life and embracing it. It seems to me that this is now so prominent, it's kind of odd. I think my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, has had some kind of facelift at some point, and she's now, reaching 70, and it just it doesn't make any sense. It's just total nonsense. I think she's finally stopped tinting her hair, right? Thank goodness. It just looks ridiculous. All of this fakeness to stave off a completely natural process of life, which eventually reaches the end point, which for some reason every human being seems to be absolutely terrified of, despite the fact that we have been dying for thousands upon thousands of years the same way as our, pet tortoises die, And it's very peculiar to me to observe this level of lack of wisdom. So, yeah, this seems to be very present in the generations that preceded us, preceded mine. So it's understandable to have this lack of respect or deference or trust in the older generations to some extent. But wisdom has a lot of value, and I don't think it's respected or it's celebrated as much as it should be, particularly by the youth. Fortunately, with my children, I think this is very, very different. Generally. So I think that's good. Maybe. I don't know. I'm generally quite happy with them. They're very respectful of their elders and stuff. I think the older one, now that she goes to school, is becoming a little bit more irreverent. But then again, she's almost an adult. A young adult. That's the kind of thing she will do. I think. I don't know. It does make me like her less though. But I don't think she cares either way. But she will. In 20, 30 years if I'm still around. Fortunately, we had her fairly young. So she's got a decent chance of hitting her 40s. While her parents are hitting their 60s, not their 75s. So, anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, but yeah, that was, in the words of Jack, solid talk. See you later.